Hello there, everyone, and welcome to our November Leadership Spotlight. My name is Joseph Wyckoff. I am a community moderator with Inspiring Leadership, and our guest for today is Thea Polancic. So by way of an introduction, I'd like to say that Thea Polancic is a passionate advocate for the power of business to create prosperity, business, and happiness in the world. She is the founder and former chair of 12 years of the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. By day, she's a managing partner of ClearSpace LLC, a US-based consulting firm that helps CEOs and their senior leadership evolve into high-performing teams and thrive in complexity. Her clients lead very successful growth stage and mature organizations across many industries and around the world. Thea is also a founding mentor to Chicago Accelerator's Techstars Chicago and the Impact Engine, and on the board of the Conscious Venture Lab in Baltimore, Maryland. She lives in Chicago with her husband, Frank, and her son, Max, and we are so pleased to have her with us. Thea, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. Before we turn things over, I actually wanted to ask you a question. I am based in New Zealand. We are an international platform, but I originally am from Chicago, and I just wanted to ask, not to take a bite out of your presentation, but what's your Chicago connection? Did you start out there, or did you find your way there?
Oh, well, I was born in the thriving metropolis of Peoria, Illinois. So I actually came to Chicago the long way around after going away to Texas for college and California for graduate school, and then went to Russia for 5 years and decided when I was going to settle back in the United States that Chicago would be a great place to come. So I've been here for more than 20 years now.
Wonderful. Well, I will step out of the way here and let you do your thing. Before we begin, though, a few housekeeping notes. If you do have any thoughts or questions, feel free to pop them into the chat or the Q&A. And after Thea is done with her presentation, we'll open up the floor for some back and forth. So Thea, I'll just take myself out here and take it away.
Thank you, Joseph. And I really appreciate, that last point that you made about questions or comments in the chat. Please definitely do weigh in and offer up your questions or your thoughts. We can make the chat dynamic. There may be a couple times where I invite an all play in the chat. So please don't hesitate to jump in and participate. And I may pause if you have your questions in there. I may be able to pause and capture one or two of those as we're going along. So please make this your conversation too. So during the conversation today, I'm delighted to be able to share about conscious capitalism with you. It is, as Joseph said, my personal purpose is the first iteration of it that I created in 2008 was that beauty by 2030, I framed it as a promise that by the year 2030, business creates a world of beauty, prosperity, and happiness. And the outgrowth of that was what became the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. So we're going to talk about the movement today. I'm going to share a little bit with you about what the 4 tenets are of conscious capitalism, why businesses are stepping in this, moving in this direction more and more, even though that may be probably intuitive to many of us who are on the call today. And then what are some steps that you could take to get involved or to increase your involvement or tune up your own practice as a conscious capitalist, not only just a conscious leader. So that's what we're going to cover today, but please definitely make it your own, and I welcome your participation. So I mentioned that I created my own purpose statement that was the source of this for me, and it actually began when around 2008, I had my own company for about 4 years. We were already successful. We were working with successful business leaders. We were making a difference, doing work that felt really inspiring. And yet I felt like I needed to create a bigger game to play, because just playing the game of winning business results from year to year was not going to be inspiring enough for me. And so I embarked on my own process to figure out what my personal purpose is, as many of you may have. And this, I'm particularly inspired. I continue to be inspired by this quote from Rainer Maria Rilke of, "I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world." This sense that we all have an impact, as Kip Tyndall, the founder of the Container Store, says, that we leave a wake that we're often, that's much greater than what we understand or what we will ever know. And so I, felt like I needed to create a bigger game to play. And so I decided to just start based on that promise. I thought, well, okay, so how am I going to actually start making this difference? And I got overwhelmed for about 6 weeks. And then I thought, oh, I guess I could start in Chicago. There's probably enough to do in Chicago. I don't have to take on the whole planet at once. And so I invited some like-minded people. I got everybody that I thought felt the same way that I did, got them to come to my house and gave them food and drink and shared my purpose with them and asked them all the tough questions I didn't have the answers to, like what do you think is possible? And who else should be involved? And how would you like to be involved? And what other questions should I be asking? And put those on big flip charts and had people just talk to each other and write their answers on the flip charts. And that's what really became what we started with. We called it originally the Chicago Transformational Leadership Exchange. And then we found out about conscious capitalism and joined forces with that movement in 2010. And so ever since then, now we were the first chapter in North America, in the second in the world. Australia was the first chapter for conscious capitalism. And we have been chugging along ever since then. And I actually have the pleasure of stepping down as the founder, as the chair after 12 years, and really knowing that we have a beautiful, wonderful leadership team to hand that over to, and that the movement will really continue in Chicago, regardless of me. So, what is this thing, this conscious capitalism? I think we all have experienced this year and the last year, like that. It's an understatement to get that we now know what it feels like to be united as a planet, as a world, in a way that we never ever experienced before. I mean, we were beginning to experience it more and more in 1989 with the advent of the internet. We all became connected in ways that we had never been before in technology, but the world has been shrinking, and we know that business has to begin to have a sense of its impact on the planet. With the conference in Glasgow that just ended this week, we're beginning to, and more challenging organizations, countries, and businesses to be able to not only be responsible for their impact, the negative impact, but actually begin to have a positive impact on the world, to use their leverage for good, to actually use the business, that the business is one of the most powerful agents of change that we have. So conscious capitalism is part of that broader trend. It is a movement that started with John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, in 2005. And he began to get a group of leaders together to just begin to engage with this idea that not only does business have a responsibility to make a difference, but it is one of our most powerful levers, if not the most powerful lever. And one of the things that inspired me as I was getting going was I read an article that mentioned that McDonald's is the largest employer of teenagers on the planet. And having lived in Moscow and been in the Moscow McDonald's, I had this visceral experience that I watched the young people working there and learning customer service and being friendly, and realizing I was really inspired by the fact that there was no place else in Russia at that time that a young person could go get a job and learn how to treat people well and be treated well and earn a great wage and be able to learn the principles of business. And so that really inspired me. And that was the beginning of, that was also, those conversations were part of conscious capitalism. In fact, the person who said that in that article later on became the chairman of the board of Chipotle, and is now moved on to invest in many companies in the food space that are conscious businesses. So we believe in conscious capitalism, that business can save the world, not just do no harm. We believe that business is good because it creates value, and that it's ethical because it's based on voluntary exchange, and that it's noble because it can elevate our existence, and that it's heroic because it lifts people out of poverty and it creates prosperity. And we can aspire to even more. So now it's a growing global movement with 28 chapters across North America and around the world. And there's plenty of work to do. The conversation has certainly moved on much more since I got started in 2008 when people just, it was completely counterintuitive to think that business could be a positive force in the world. And but there's still plenty to do. So, I'd ask how many of you are currently involved in conscious capitalism, and maybe a place to start would be to look and see which brands do you purchase, which brands do you participate, which companies do you engage with as a consumer, or as a business partner, or as an employee that you feel are conscious businesses. So this is a first opportunity for an all play in the chat. I'd love to see just like what are some businesses that you think are conscious capitalist businesses that you engage with as a stakeholder. And these may be some of the brands that come to mind. I love this. Local businesses in my town, Whole Foods. Yep, we've got Whole Foods up here, and some that may be surprising to you, like Bridgewater. So Bridgewater is the largest hedge fund in the world. They've got more than $1 trillion under management. And we don't typically think of businesses in that space in the conscious, as a conscious business. But Ray Dalio, who is the founder of Bridgewater, began in the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, began putting out a letter to their portfolio companies, to the companies they're invested in, big ones like global multinational corporations, and said it was very important that year. He said, unless you have a higher purpose than just making money, then you have to have a higher purpose than just making money. And if we are invested in you and you don't, then we're going to have a conversation about that. And that really began to change the conversation in the financial services space and in the publicly traded market space about it was no longer okay. And this was also not just a small business movement anymore, or something just for, as John Mackey would say, hippie grocers like Whole Foods. So there are more and more organizations now that are participating, and it's almost as if you are a very large organization like Tata or Unilever or Nestle, that you realize that you have to be up to something much bigger than, and you have to be, as Paul Pullman would say, who's the former CEO of Unilever, like we have such a huge economy of scale that we have to be true ourselves up to something much bigger than just turning a profit. Thanks, Lynn, with Adobe and WW International, Micron. So it's great to see we all participate in conscious business in some way. If we're a customer, or if we are an employee, or if we are a supplier to them, or we're a stakeholder, then you are already participating in the conscious capitalist movement. So why is it attractive to business leaders? Why is this happening? Well, one of the reasons is that it's the path for performance. So if the capitalism part weren't part of it, then it would not be gaining the traction that it does. But we know now from Jim Collins and Good to Great that businesses that are purpose and values driven outperform the market by 15 to 1 and outperform the comparison companies 6 to 1. What that means is the companies that they viewed as great in their good to great model, that values and purpose driven companies outperform the good to great companies by a factor of 6. A fund was created that just invested in businesses that are purpose and multi-stakeholder businesses. And over a 10-year fund, they found, and Raj Sisodia's book, Firms of Endearment, really captures the story. They found that these businesses outperform, again, conventional competitors by a factor of 6. And then we also know that, and this is so intuitive for so many of us now, that values-driven organizations, they have higher revenue growth, they have a greater job creation over time, and their stock price growth is 12 times higher, and profit performance is higher. Now, is this short-term, can an organization create a temporary short-term bump in order to just produce a result in a year or 2 years and then take their money and get out? Yeah, they sure can. But what we're really looking at is, again, here, great businesses, sustaining businesses, long-term businesses. So this is the kind of business performance. If you were an investor in Southwest Airlines and American Airlines over the same period of time, you would be much happier owning Southwest Airlines stock than American Airlines stock. And those are two organizations that are in the same industry, same city, based in the same city, both highly regulated industries, both dealing with the same factors, and yet the performance is dramatically different. And so it's like, why is that? And one of the other things that we know is that it really has to do with the people, that the people of those organizations are, there is a heart that's engaged, and that they care, and that more and more we're seeing the word, love is being included in the business model for conscious businesses, that they are run on love and not fear. And so it's that engagement and the passion that people bring, the sense of identification with their businesses, that really unleashes the performance. So conscious capitalism is always about both. It's about people and performance. It's about profit and purpose. And for those of you in the conscious leadership space, this is also, this is one of the fundamental skills that we have to have, is the ability to hold complexity, right? To hold things that seem to be opposites, the polarity thinking. And that's one of the things that's required in order to be a conscious capitalist, or in order to engage in the kind of business that's really going to transform the world. So what is conscious capitalism? So there are 4 tenets: higher purpose, but there's a stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture, or values-driven culture. So let's take a look at each one of these. So higher purpose. The purpose is, it's the why. It's what do we stand for? That we have to have a reason that we exist that's bigger than just making money. We would say that profit is not the purpose of the company. Profit is the output that shows you whether you're fulfilling on your purpose. An entrepreneurial organization, I work with a lot of early stage companies too. When you started your businesses, perhaps, or when people start their businesses, it's because there's fundamentally a difference that they want to make in the world. And then whether you are profitable or not, or how profitable you are, is a function of whether your business model works. But it is not the point of the business. That's like saying inhaling or exhaling is the point of a human being. So you have to have a higher purpose than just making money. And we just know that people are no longer inspired to just trade their job, exchange labor for money, to show up at work and then live their life for what happens after work. And we're seeing the great resignation in the United States. And I would suggest to you that is not, it's not just because of COVID. It's actually like the adoption of technology. It's something that was escalated by COVID, but even in the last 10 years, we know that 85% of the millennial generation will quit their jobs or go to a job with no other job ready yet if they don't identify with the company's purpose and values. And so they've really led the way in pressure as employees and as consumers to cause companies to have to change the way they're thinking about it. So what are some examples of company purpose? Well, here's Starbucks. So you would think Starbucks purpose might be about coffee or about the experience of community, and it actually is to inspire and nurture the human spirit. Starbucks views its purpose as a gathering place for people and for conversation, and that is one of the reasons it would explain why they make decisions that sometimes may not make sense. Like they had sort of an experiment that didn't really work, to have people engage with their baristas and conversations about race that like notoriously, famously flopped. But Howard Schultz was okay with that flop because that experiment was aligned with what they stand for. So is it always gonna go perfectly? No, but the fact that it was in the spirit of what they stand for, they're much more comfortable with that mistake. Here's another one. Unilever is making sustainable living commonplace. So they look at, and again, they tie their performance to the United Nations goals, and realize that they have an ability to impact particularly the lives of women and children in all of the countries that they serve. And so that is aligned with their purpose. Southwest, to democratize the skies. Before they came along, flying was for people who were wealthy. It was not something that you could do if you were a grandma who wanted to go see her kids and didn't have a lot of money. And so that is what they stand for. And then here's a local example here in Chicago. So Gold Eagle is a manufacturer of oil additives, fuel additives, lubricants, things that you would spray on your car seats or your dashboard or your lawn furniture. And you might not think that that is going to be a conscious business, but their purpose is to preserve and protect the things you love while not harming the environment. And for them, it's twofold. They see that not only do they have the opportunity to protect things so that they don't get thrown away. If your car or your lawnmower or your snow blower or your lawn furniture lasts longer, then you're not going to get rid of it. It's not going to go into landfill. But the other thing is that they actually purchase other brands that are in this space and reformulate them chemically so that they aren't harmful for the environment. A conscious culture is the second part. So what's that mean? It means to have a values-driven culture, but these companies also, they take it very seriously. It's not that these are not like the teamwork, the kitten poster that's on the wall. You know, they don't have the values printed all over the hallways or the conference rooms or in their cafeteria without it actually meaning how they walk their talk in all of their jobs, in each job with each of their stakeholders. I remember we were engaged to help with a values project for one company, and we were asking them, well, what does it look like if a receptionist or one of the people in your call center walks the talk of this value you have of teamwork? Because I mean, they work by themselves pretty much all day long. And the CEO said, well, you know what that means is that we just built this fantastic commissary, and it means that if you're sitting at a table and there's somebody you don't know who's standing there with their tray looking for a place to sit down, that you invite them to come and sit down with you. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about values-driven culture, where you hire and fire for values, where it's not okay to be a high-performing jerk that, you know, and justify keeping that person just because of their output. That person, you'd actually realize that the cost of that person to the working environment, to the fabric, the culture of the organization is more expensive than what they bring in. And we know that when people come together, there's a heartbeat that emerges, and it's either a healthy heartbeat or it's an unhealthy heartbeat. So values-driven companies, you know, take that very seriously. So here's one example. This is Tata. Tata is an Indian conglomerate. They are, in fact, there's a movie, I think it's on Netflix, which is about the siege of the Maharaja Hotel, which was and what the employees did to take care of each other and to take care of all the guests while they were undergoing that. But they also have a lot of other different kinds of businesses. And these are their company values, which may sound, you know, like pretty straightforward. But the thing that's different, that's unique about them, is that they publish that as their code of conduct, and they commit publicly that they are going to engage with all of their stakeholders in all of their businesses. Kevin, I love your comment. It's so much nicer to actually work with humans. I agree with you. Another example, here's a Chicago example. So Golub is a 50-year-old real estate firm. They have owned many of the famous buildings downtown in Chicago and still do. So if you know Chicago, they've owned the Hancock Tower. So, you know, people who build and operate skyscrapers. And at one point, this again is a company that I've had the pleasure of working with. They were looking at bringing on the next generation, the younger generations of the family. And they said, you know, we don't need to make our values clear. Like, it's just part of who we are. Everybody sort of knows that. And then what they realized was that they had to make them, even though it was sort of implicit for them, it wasn't for, if they were going to ensure that the organization was going to continue to live on in the future, they had to make those explicit. So they created, these are the values that they created, that they distilled out of their, that really capture the personality and the culture of the organization. And now they have a train the trainer program. So the employees lead the values training program internally. And each time when a new person joins, they get one of these tiles, and they after going through the training, they write down which of the values really stands out for them and what does it mean for them, and they add their tile to the wall. This is another example of a local firm, and I love this example, Ace Metalcraft. We often think, okay, well, this is for, you know, this values thing, maybe for consumer-based businesses or more sexy businesses. And so this is a sexy business. Ace Metalcraft does sheet metal bending for chicken nugget machines and other food manufacturing. So they have a manufacturing environment, and they have 5 different languages spoken there. And they realized that when we create what our values are, and Jean Pizzo is the CEO over here on the left holding the trust sign. She said, we had 5 different cultures and 5 different languages when we said, we couldn't just throw out like respect and say, oh, respect, like everybody knows what that means. We had to have very thoughtful conversations with translators about what respect means to someone who originally came from, former communist country, to someone who used to be in a gang on this, in a gang environment, or somebody who comes from Vietnam and has a completely different sense of what respect means. And so they came up with very pragmatic, practical definitions. Respect means I promptly return what I borrow. I share my knowledge. I keep my workplace clean. I just love how simple those are. There's no jargon in that. It's not like it's just, the word on the wall. The next piece is the stakeholder value creation model instead of just shareholder value. So it used to be, and I still am seeing this, I saw it just recently, a board 360 document that the board is being measured on. Do they challenge the organization to produce shareholder value? So it used to be that the business of business was to produce money. And now we know that actually businesses are more successful when they treat all of their stakeholder network as if it is an ecosystem. And that to maintain that healthy ecosystem and to recognize the interconnectedness of that you cannot preference one stakeholder over and over and over again to the detriment of, employees or customers or your suppliers, and ensure the long-term success of the organization. If I turn the screws on my suppliers over and over again, when I really need to grow, they're not going to be there for me. I might even put them out of business if I don't allow them to make an honest, a successful return, successful profit on their business with us. So we start with a stakeholder model that looks like this, that your purpose is in the middle, and then you engage all of your stakeholders in the fulfillment of your purpose. And you look at, what do they need from us? These are two-way relationships. What do they need from us, and how well are we doing at providing value to them? And how well are we doing at engaging them in our purpose? A lot of times companies think maybe of employees and customers, but then putting together a stakeholder map like that, it can be very surprising to say, like, wow, we really don't think of our suppliers as a stakeholder. Or if you're leading a department in an organization, you can still do a stakeholder map. We did that with one organization that was sort of the sales part of a company, and they were treating the finance department, the CFO and their team, as if they were the enemy instead of a stakeholder. And it really changed their way of looking at their internal stakeholders as well. And then with the community, a lot of times we'll say, and I'll challenge a CEO or a business leader, how does your organization inherently create value in the community that is not philanthropy or volunteering? Because those are easy bolt-ons. You can have a completely unconscious business and say, oh, we give a bunch of money to, the Metropolitan Opera and our people volunteer. But it's like, how does your business organically create value, organically create well-being in the communities in which it resides? So organizations that think in this way also unlock the synergy and the value inside of that network. So this is an example of Studio Movie Grill. They're purpose-driven movie theater, and their purpose is opening hearts and minds one story at a time. And they cared very powerfully not only about the wonderful part of movies and the entertainment part, but also the power of documentary films to impact people's lives and change people's perspectives about things. And they created the stakeholder model that they actually will go into a community and work with that community to find out what is important to them when they enter into a new community, and then work with community leaders in order to set up ways to give the theater away, or to show films, or to host events that are important to that community as they become a valued part of that community. And this is upper left is just an example with a famous entertainer in Chicago called Chance the Rapper, who was so inspired by what they did when they came into his neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, that he actually bought the theater out for the first 2 weeks and just to engage the people in that community and show them like this is a business that we really need to support. And then the last piece is conscious leadership, and this might be what you're most familiar with if you're here, if you're an inspiring leader. And this is the trickiest part, because like I said before, in order to lead a purpose-driven business that is also profit-oriented, it's not, in social entrepreneurship, sometimes when we use phrases like that, it has built into it, like we're going to make a difference and we're going to make less money. And I would say you probably need to look at your business model. Like you can't use that as an excuse for not being successful. You have to do the purpose and profit piece at the same time. And then I'm going to lead the business for all the stakeholders, and I'm going to balance that network. Like maybe I have to make tough decisions, but maybe I'm going to go to that stakeholder and I'm going to engage with them thoughtfully and in a caring way, in dialogue about how we're going to make that decision together, how that's going to impact us. And I'm going to have a values-driven culture. So I'm going to be willing to give up maybe some people who are high performers because they're not walking the talk, or maybe wait longer to fill a position until we get somebody who's really a fit. So I'm going to lead all of those things, and that requires an operating system that is really challenging. It requires an operating system upgrade from all of us, this ability to hold that tension. And, as Paul Pullman said, if you're not going to publish quarterly earnings, he went to the marketplace and said, we are not going to provide quarterly guidance anymore. And if that is not okay with you, then you probably should go and invest in another company. But to do that requires a certain intestinal fortitude. And all of that is built into, that complexity is built into conscious leadership, which is why I'm so excited about working with leaders. And I'm sure you are about your own development and working with others as well. So one of the things we know is that the leaders who perform, and this is based on one leader that we really like, Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, and their work in adult development at Harvard, that we know that leaders who are leading most effectively in VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments, the complexity that we are dealing with right now, we know that there are certain attributes about those leaders. We know that they are servant leaders. So they view leadership as a service. They are emotionally and spiritually mature. It may not mean that they are religious, but that they have a sense of connection to something bigger than just themselves. They are systems thinkers and feelers. So they not only see the interconnectedness of the business, but they also have this sense, like I can tell when there's something's needed. I can get a sense of how people are feeling. They're purpose-driven, long-term, and visionary, and that they have a great capacity for love and care. And that is what we are seeing from the men and women who are leading most effectively in this environment. And we use things like the Leadership Circle Profile 360 is a great way to measure this. Suzanne Cook-Reuter's work is another. There are a lot of ways now that we can measure what level someone is operating in terms of consciousness and leadership. And we know, and John recently came out with, he's not the only person by any means who has written about conscious leadership, but he did just put another book out last year with Scott McIntosh, and that conscious leaders seek to make a positive impact on the world through their organization. We used to talk to leaders who would say, they build $100 million company and they sell their $100 million company, and now they want to go start a trust in order to make a fund in order to make a difference in something that they care about. And we would say, don't sell your company, because you can move that purpose, that difference that you want to make, through that powerful network of stakeholders that you have. You have a lot more leverage while you still have your $100 million company than after you sell it. So we know that they are leaders who help people grow and evolve as individuals, as well as, in the pursuit of the game, that particular business game that they are choosing to play together. So, where might you start? Some people say, well, I'm not the CEO of my company, or I have a small business. How am I going to make a difference in this? Maybe this is just for, you're just talking to the people who are in big decision-making seats. But the thing that I would say is let's start with our own personal conscious capitalism. So what is your purpose? And what are your values? And who are your stakeholders? And then how are you developing yourself? And which of these might be your growth edge? So we know that we can expand our circle, our sphere of influence, if we are focusing on the things that we can impact. Stephen Covey's impact and influence. So what can I impact in the immediate area of each of these four pillars, and where can I unlock greater performance or greater success for myself at the same time? Because again, it's about being successful too. If you're in the business of business, we want it to be a game that we win in a good way. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, I'm going to pause for questions in a moment, but the place to start, you can start with diving into conscious capitalism. It is one of many movements. There's the Shared Value Initiative from Michael Porter. There's the Oxford Center for Mutuality. There are a lot of sister, the Social Venture Network. There's a lot of sister movements happening now, but it's conscious capitalism is a good one too, because there's a place for everybody to participate in the movement. Tanya, I love your question. So how this affects or works for women in leadership. Interesting that you asked that. I mean, I would like to know a little bit more about what's behind your question, but the first thing that I would share while you kind of think about that and see if there's other detail you'd like to add. That one of the interesting things we know is that when you go back to this conscious leadership, let me see if I can back up easily. Yeah. We do know that, especially based on the work from Bob Anderson, who created the Leadership Circle and the Leadership Circle Profile 360, we do know that women are better at this than men. And that is not categorically true, and gender certainly is not something that we can just talk about kind of this or that anymore. But we do know that feminine energy, we all have feminine energy and we all have masculine energy, that those of us who have, people who have that feminine energy tend to rank higher more consistently on the Leadership Circle profile and other measures of conscious leadership. And it may be because women are more innately socially attuned to relationships or to working things through relationships. I don't want to create a lot of generalizations that are heavy-handed. But that's interesting. The other thing is, Paul, I had a conversation with Paul Pullman of Unilever a few years ago, and I asked him that myself. And he said to a room of largely male, white, 350 CEOs, he said, let me tell you guys, he said, I realize that this room is largely full of, it's all men, mostly men here, but he's like, the women are the ones who are going to lead us forward on this. And women are naturally better at this than men. So I think we're seeing that in this environment that we are seeing more women rising because it is a conversation that maybe maybe even some of this polarity is built into us more. But the feminine energy for sure. And Nilima Bhatt is a great person to look at for this. Shakti Leadership is another great book that Raj Sisodia wrote together with Nilima. That the feminine is the feminine energy, the feminine essence, however we would label that, is what has to come online in all of us in order. And for many of us who are women, that's something that for us to work on too, because we've gotten a lot of mileage out of running on testosterone. We have testosterone too, but we replenish ours by sleeping, and men replenish theirs by competing more. That's why men go out and play basketball after work, and we come home and crash. So how do we find our own, access both the masculine and the feminine, both the caring and challenge inside of ourselves, and bring that to the table? It's such a rich conversation. And I appreciate you kicking us off with that question, Tanya. What other questions are bubbling up for you, or reflections or observations or challenges?
Hi there, Thea. This is Joseph Wyckoff. I am just popping back into the conversation with a question for you. A lot of what I'm seeing is very much pitched toward, if you are an entrepreneur starting a business, if you are running a business, if you are a consumer, do you have any specific advice for those people who who find themselves somewhere in the middle manager?
Yeah.
How do they invest?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joseph. And it really is why I would challenge them to look at their own personal conscious capitalism. Just like we worked with an organization, that I described, the sort of sales organization inside of a much larger company. This was not, they were leaders who were already there. And we began to engage with them and say, like, what is your purpose as a business unit? Which of the company values do you identify with? What is the culture and the value system of your organization? Who are your stakeholders? How well are you doing at engaging your stakeholders in the fulfillment of your purpose as a business unit? And how are you developing yourselves as conscious leaders? So I think there's an entry point for us, no matter where we sit, whether we're entrepreneurs, whether we are running a company that's making the shift. We work with a lot of companies that are making a shift in this direction. And sometimes they start with purpose. Sometimes they start with their values. Sometimes they start with conscious leadership. But whether you're a new employee in a much larger organization or a mid-level leader, I believe that there's a place that you can begin to look at where can I have an impact? What is my sphere of impact and my sphere of attention and my sphere of influence? Lynn, asking about, we can absolutely provide, I will provide the slides. I certainly don't, they're also, I would suggest, Lynn, that you look at the Conscious Capitalism website, because there are a lot. The Chicago website has some resources, but the global resource website has a lot of videos and case studies and guides that you can use there, and it will point you in the direction of a lot of other resources too. I think they've done a nice job of building this out, but absolutely you can use, I will make my slides available, and you're welcome to attribute, you don't have to attribute them to me, just attribute them to Conscious Capitalism. Let me scroll back up here. Kevin, good question. This always comes up. People will ask, do you have an assessment? Are you measuring whether companies are doing it yet? And I think that on one hand, we know, right? We'll look, an easy thing is to look at their website, and can you find their purpose and their values anywhere on their website? But also, what is it like for stakeholders who engage with them? What do people say? So a lot of times people will ask that question when they're job hunting, and they want to make sure that they go to work for a conscious business. And I would say, when you're interview them too, and ask them what their company values are. And first of all, if the person knows them off the top of their head, that's going to tell you something right away. But also consumers can tell the difference. And certainly suppliers can tell the difference by how people engage with them. From SGI leadership, experiencing a distinction between in values between employees who are externally focused versus internally focused. External customer focused employees place their values on the customer and don't necessarily care as much about internal support teams. Conversely, folks who are internally focused sometimes have blind spots about their customer experience. How have you seen this approach bridge the gap with the values discussion? It's a great question. And I think it does happen, because on one hand you see, oh, well, we're doing values, but it really is an internal thing. Or you'll see, and Simon Sinek was a marketer first. You'll see companies hire organizations like his firm, and it ends up feeling like a branding exercise if it's not linked. So I would say that the latter situation, it's really important to have, if you're going to go out to the market and say that you're a purpose or values driven organization, it's important that the leaders are doing that work internally and individually, that people do individual values work, that they talk about values individually, and that they talk about their, when we start working with a company on their purpose, all the leaders do their personal purpose statements first. Because if you don't know what it feels like what the value, that being clear about what you stand for, what value that provides to you as an individual, and how are you really going to realize what the value of it is and have the integrity to stand for it as an organization? But I think making sure that those efforts are, that they are looking at this whole stakeholder map. So, looking to see if this is our value, what does it look like to walk the talk of that with our suppliers or with our customers or with our employees? But creating those kinds of opportunities for cross-functional dialogue, I think, are really important. It's a great question. Any other questions before we wrap for the evening? I would encourage you to reach out. There are a lot of local chapters, so reach out to the local chapter, but there also is a lot of programming now available if you sign up on the global website. There are forums and open conversations and Zoom calls and all kinds of things that you can participate in from wherever you are in the world. Um, and then you're welcome to reach out and with any questions that you come up for you after today. If I can't answer them, I can definitely point you. We'll try to point you in the right direction. I do have advice. I mean, Melanie, where I would start. So Melanie asks, do you have any advice for influencing your company's leadership to choose conscious capitalism? I think the first thing, Melanie, is to educate yourself beyond our conversation today, so that and as you do that, begin to think, like, whether you pick up Conscious Capitalism as a book, or whether you pick up, another resource. Like I said, there's a lot of things listed on the consciouscapitalism.org website. There's the Reinventing Capitalism is a new book that just came out. And I forgot what the author's name is, Rebecca something, but it's really, really good. Begin to educate yourself. And as you're doing that, start reflecting on your company. Like, what would the value proposition be? Why would it be important for us to become more conscious as a company? And really come from, how would this be a win-win? How would it cause us to be more successful? Because I would suspect if the company isn't focusing on purpose or values driven, like the cultural pieces of it, they're probably very focused on winning the game of business. So for those people, like, speak the language that they speak. We often are not influential when we're trying to just speak the language we speak and resist the language of business and business outcomes. But I find that I'm most persuasive with companies when I can make the business case very powerfully for how it's going to help them win the game of business as well, and attract better people and retain them longer, and not have to be competing just on salaries, because people so identify with what the company stands for that they actually will take less in pay because they care more about where they are. Not that we're going to pay people less than what they should be paid, but we're just not going to get into this constant one-upmanship of, like, how much have you paid me lately, or else I'll leave. So I would say, reflect, speak, and then put it in terms that really you think speak to the language of the business leaders you're trying to influence. It's a great question. Vicky weighing in with, who chooses the causes for companies who choose conscious capitalism? Is it CEO driven primarily, or alignment with products or services? So what I would say is that conscious capitalism isn't a cause-based philanthropic strategy. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant, but we would kind of consider that to be sort of a bolt-on. So but I appreciate you asking that, because it makes it implies that I have not done a good job of communicating that it really is, it's like the operating system of the business. Like, we are going to fundamentally operate from being clear about why we're here. Like, what would the world be missing if this company went out of business? And if we can't answer that, we got bigger problems, right? So why are we here? What is the culture that we want to have? And how do we engage all of our stakeholders? And where are there opportunities to create these win-win-win-win-win solutions, where we're not consistently putting one stakeholder group, giving them the short end of the stick, whether it's suppliers or employees, for the sake of customers or ownership. And then, how are we evolving the people who work here? That just becomes an organic way that we view how business is done. It's not a cause. And then we may or may not invest in causes. Gene Pizzo, who runs Ace Metalcraft, has said, I don't ask my people to volunteer. Like, we feel like when we send people home happier and fulfilled because of how they were treated at work and their opportunity to, like, make a difference and do a good job, that is a contribution to their families, to their church groups, to their communities that they're going home to, as opposed to sending people home ready to kick the dog because they're, demoralized and felt like they weren't treated as a human being during the day. She's like, so they're tired. I don't expect them to volunteer. That doesn't make any sense for us. So it's like, when it becomes organic, we don't have to kind of like bolt on these things like philanthropic investments or or donating our time, or having kind of the employees. Oh, that's the employee thing. It's like the women thing. Oh, the women's group. It's over there. They sit over there. That's their table. Vicki, I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I hope that was helpful. Any other?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Thanks, Joseph.
I did just want to pop in here with a final question, which is, you've been doing this for a while, 12 years. Have you seen any change in reception for conscious capitalism in, say, the last 2 years with everything that's been going on in the world?
Well, in the last 2 years, we've seen, I think, just a great degree of confusion and and freak out in the face of complexity. I would say prior to the last 2 years, we have definitely seen a shift. I mean, just the fact that you see things like the Business Roundtable now, and you see the shared value, and you see these like big companies, like big influential companies, and companies you wouldn't expect, coming out and saying, oh, we are purpose driven, we care about that, we care about more than profit. So we definitely have seen that this conversation is moving more mainstream. Is it potentially purpose washing? That's okay, because it just means, like, if there's people me tooing, like, oh, we recycle, like, but if people are doing it, it means that they're feeling the pressure, that conversation is building, and they're feeling the pressure to move in the right direction. And so it used to be that we did the conscious capitalism thing over here, and then the companies that we interacted with were just like, that was not their thing. Now we're seeing that those things are more like smashed together, and there has been some degree to which the outside influences have caused people to take this more seriously. I mean, business is certainly booming for us, and we're getting a lot of requests. I was just talking to a colleague of mine yesterday who said she's gotten 3 different requests from family office firms or private equity firms to get clear about what their purpose is so they can do ESG investing. And I would agree with Kevin that there also has been, just because the situation has been so complex and people are so overwhelmed, that there has been a certain amount of just confusion, and it's not like contraction all the way, but just like not sure even where to focus. So in some ways, I feel it's softened things up, but in other ways, people are also quite contracted still. I think that's interesting. Last one, Melanie, with the Great Resignation. I think people that COVID has certainly escalated something that we saw already beginning with millennials, with the millennial generation, and Gen Z is the same. So it just, like, all of us now do stuff on Zoom, and when and remote work has changed, and their expectations around that, and things like the bandwidth, broadband, like there's just technology has come online, schools being able to use a lot of different channels of communication with students and for teaching. We are also seeing, I think, like, that COVID escalated that, but the seeds were there already. Same thing with the Great Resignation. And I think companies, we see people leaving, but they're leaving to go to companies that they care about. And yeah, there are people who are leaving to go because they're getting paid a lot more money someplace else. So that there's a certain amount of that going on. But there's also people's just willingness to say, you know what, I don't feel inspired by what I'm doing. I'm not inspired by this company. I'm going to just take a break. All right, guys, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you, Joseph and Zach, for shepherding us and so gracefully this evening. I hope that everything kind of recorded well, and that I hope you all have a lovely evening or morning wherever you are in the world. And I will definitely work with you, Joseph, in order to get the slides to you, so that in a format that we can share with people.
Thank you so much. And for everyone out there, thank you for joining us. If you are interested in finding out more about Thea and what she does, she has her slide up now where you can see her email address and the Conscious Capitalism website. If you're interested in learning more about inspiring leadership, you can find us online at inspiringleadership.community. And I hope that everyone, Thea, thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. And to all of our audience, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Joseph. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.